Hi guys, today I'll be taking a look at a sharp tactile switch, the Kailh Box Royal. Let's get started. Now, the Kailh Box Royal is a tactile switch made in collaboration with Novelkeys, as they didn't have a proper tactile switch on offer back in 2018 before this released. But do correct me on that, since I could be misremembering their offerings back then. It's been a while. Additionally, these now have a crystal version which have transparent housings, but they have the same specs as the one I have, so they should be the same performance wise. However, something to note, these have been retooled. I'm not sure how many times, but when these first came out, they were breaking keycap stems since the switch stem was thicker than most switch stems. Now, pricing wise, these are $18 for 36 switches on Novelkeys, placing them in the lower mid range. And this is what they look like when disassembled. Feel free to pause the video. Now, let's move on to the switch categories. On-center key presses are extremely smooth with no scratchiness whatsoever. However, off-center key presses are scratchy and slight binding is present during normal typing sessions, but I wouldn't say that these are overly problematic. Overall, they're a bit inconsistent and I personally wouldn't recommend them even though they have a very smooth on-center performance. 6 out of 10. Now, according to Kailh, these switches have an actuation force of 45 grams at 1.8mm, a peak tactile force of 75 grams, and a bottom-out force of 70 grams at 3.6mm. Now, in terms of the actual key feel, there's a very slight pre-travel just before the tactile bump, which you can see on this force curve. This isn't bad or anything, I just don't prefer it. Additionally, you may have spotted that there are two tactile bumps on the force curve which reminded me of the Akko CS Jelly Blue, but in reality there's only one tactile bump. Overall, the weighting itself is pretty good, I like it, the tactility is nice and sharp. However, the consistency could do with some more refining. It's not great, but it's not a deal breaker either. 7 out of 10. Now, these sound clacky as to be expected, but they also sound scratchy and very thin. They don't make a pleasant sound, but I suspect it's inoffensive to most people. Additionally, some switches make a faint clicky sound which wasn't present in the less tactile Kailh Box Burnt Orange. Take a listen. Overall, they aren't anything special. 5 out of 10. Now, take a listen and enjoy. Now, typing on these have been a disappointment. They simply have way too many downsides. Firstly, as I mentioned, some of the switches click, which isn't great when you work in a quiet environment. Plus, tactile switches aren't meant to click, so this is a flawed design. Secondly, the switch installed in my spacebar kept chattering the whole time, even more so compared to the equally tactile MOMOKA Shark switch, and again, that's not great to see on a brand new set of switches. And thirdly, they are scratchy and inconsistent, although compared to the first two aspects, this is the least impactful in my opinion. Still, it needs to be mentioned because there are switches better than this. Overall, whilst I do like the weighting and the tactility, they have so many downsides, but I wish Kailh would improve on them. 5 out of 10. Now, gaming on these was also disappointing. However, I will say that just like the Shark Switch, the tactility on these is something you can actually rely on, so that's one good thing about them. But it pretty much ends there. The biggest downside is chattering, which gets very annoying very quickly in fast-paced games like in Doom Eternal. These are not great for that. However, for slower paced or casual games, they aren't terrible, although the scratchiness, binding and inconsistency do show themselves here, so they aren't great in this aspect either. Overall, they have a lackluster gaming performance. They could work in an emergency, but I wouldn't rely on them for anything more than that. 5 out of 10. In conclusion, just buy the MOMOKA Shark. It's basically an upgrade to these, and those should also be cheaper too. There's really no reason to buy these unless you want to make a Franken switch or something. The final score for this switch is 28 out of 50 or 56%, which is lower than average at the moment. And that's the end of the review. Next time, I don't know what switch I'll be reviewing, so you'll just have to wait and see. Until then, take care and goodbye.